I was adopted. I never knew my real mother, rather. I knew her at one time, but I left her side when I was too little to be able to remember. I love my adopted family, though. They were so kind to me. I ate well. I lived in a warm and comfortable house, and I got to stay up pretty late. There's my mother. I never called her mom or anything like that. I just called her by her first name, Janice. She didn't mind at all, though. I called her that for so long, I don't think she even noticed. Anyhow, she was a very kind woman. I think that she is the one who recommended my adoption in the first place. Sometimes I would lay my head against her in front of the television and she would tickle my back with her nails. She is one of those Hollywood mothers. Second, there's Dad. His real name was Richard, but he never really liked me much, so I began to refer to him as Dad in a desperate attempt to gain his affection. It didn't work. I think that no matter what I called him, he would never love me as much as his own child. That's understandable. So I really didn't press the matter. The most notable attribute of Dad was his unmoving sternness. He was not afraid to pop his children when they did something wrong. I found that out before I could use the restroom properly. He didn't hesitate to spank me. Well, I'm in line, and it's because of his methods. Lastly, is my sister. Little Emily was really young when I was adopted, so we were about the same age, but she was slightly older. I like to think of her as my little sister, though. We got along better than any sibling could possibly get along. We would always stay up late together and just talk. Well, she did a lot of the talking. I mostly just listened because I loved her. It was a great setup that we had. We were short on bedrooms. So, because I didn't want to sleep in the living room by myself when I was littler, I had a pallet set up for me next to her bed on the floor. This is where I have slept since, but it was cool with me because I enjoyed being with her, and I had always felt pretty protective of my little sis. Everything changed on a horrible Wednesday night. I was at home, taking a nap, when little Emily opened the front door. The sound of the door opening pulled me to a state of consciousness, and I walked from the room down the hall to the living room. That's when I first remembered it Wednesday. I was never any good at keeping track of what day it was. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say my sense of time was horrible. But nevertheless, I knew it was Wednesday because Emily had just come home from her church's youth group gathering. She walked in the front door and hugged me, and then was followed in by Dad and Janice. "You have a good nap?" Janae said teasingly as she ruffled up my hair. I just shook my head away and snorted in a manner that clearly expressed that I was teasing back with her. "Don't you snort at your mother like that," said my father, gruffly with authority. He shut the door behind him and hung up his coat. I was clearly joking. I growled under my breath and must not have heard me because I didn't feel him smack me. Emily then proceeded to our room and I followed. She started telling me about her day. Usual teenage girl stuff, but I listened so that she would feel better. After her summary, she suggested watching TV, and I obliged and jumped onto the couch as she was going for the remote. She rolled her eyes at my little brother like immaturity and scooted me over and sat down. The TV turned on, and we watched it together until the sun went down. Emily was the kind of girl that, instead of watching cartoons and soap operas, would rather watch Discovery and Animal Planet and Natural Geographic. I like those too, so I didn't mind. Actually, those were the only channels that can hold my attention. So, it got late and Janice walked up behind the sofa. "Emily, it's past your bedtime. Turn off the television and go to your room. You too," she pointed at me. Emily turned off the program we were watching grudgingly and stood up. She started down the hallway to our room. As I followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We went into our room and Emily turned off the light. Just as she did, I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. It was out the window, but as soon as I redirected my line of sight to where the window was no longer in my peripheral vision, what it was that I thought I saw was gone. I still remained alert, for my sister's sake. I laid there in the darkness, with nothing but the thin ray of light from the street lamp outside to illuminate the room. It wasn't much. Time and time again, I could have sworn that I heard subtle sounds just out the window. A twig break, leaves crunching, and all the while I could smell a faint stench of sweat. in blood. I kept my eyes open most of the sounds outside subsided, and the smell left my nose. I began to feel at ease. Not long after that, I heard a very loud crash on the other side of the house. I was up in an instant. "There's someone in the house?" I barked with extreme adrenaline coursing through me. "Wake up," I shrilly pleaded with Emily. She did, and as soon as I saw her sit up, I ran to my parents' room. Dad was dead. His neck was splayed open and gaping as blood spilled out of it, off the bed, and onto the floor. I saw that the master bathroom's door was closed, and just before it, on the outside, a man. He was very large and rugged. He turned around and saw me, and that's when I saw him accurately for the first time. I won't forget it. His eyes were large and beady and trapped with lust. He was styling a beard that was badly unkempt with blood dripping off. His clothes were dirty, and his face was cold. Just then, I noticed the same horrid smell of sweat and blood from earlier. But this time, he saw me. He saw me and grinned with a set of crooked yellow teeth. That smile threw me off. I thought that I was going to die, but then he turned back to the bathroom door completely unperturbed by my presence. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I just yelled and cried. I watched as he shouldered through door that was Mom's only protection. I watched as he raised the large razor that he was carrying, but had obviously neglected to use properly. I watched as he sliced her open and tore her to shreds. I then heard something. The last thing that I wanted to hear, it was Emily's scream coming from behind me. The large monstrosity looked up from my butchered mother and stared at my little sister. I was distraught. He stood up and quickly started walking toward us. My sis turned and ran, and I was at a loss when he bypassed me and went straight after her. Why was she still in the house? Had she not assessed the situation and run? Apparently not. And now she was dead and I was alone. I ran after them both. I expected the man to kill her, as he had the rest of my family, but I was sadly mistaken. He grabbed her by the arm and jerked her as a way to make clear that he was in control. He dragged her through the house. I was making all of the noise I could now, hoping and praying that someone would come to my aid. He mustn't take her, not her. As he passed me, I backed against the wall and whimpered with terror. Why? He didn't respond, except by putting his free hand on my head, while Emily screamed in the other, and saying, "Good boy." He gave another crooked grin and a very cold, unnatural laugh. I followed him to the door, where he dragged my helpless sister after him. He opened it, pulled her out, and slammed it shut behind him. I am now sitting in the house with my mutilated, adopted parents, shivering and whimpering with dismay. He's out there with her, doing who knows what to her, and I can't do anything. I would if I could. I would chase after them in a heartbeat, but I can't. I sit here, looking at the front door. I look down at my paws. If only I could open doors. There was a girl who had an illness and was bedridden for the majority of her life. She was recently diagnosed to die within the next couple of months, so her parents decided to spend as much time with her as they could before her time came. They decided that the best thing was to go camping at a local site for a little bit, since the daughter was stuck in the hospital for so long. On their way there, the girl was quiet as usual and laid in the back while the parents talked amongst themselves. When they finally reached their destination, they pitched the tent, unpacked everything, and started a campfire. The mother was constantly filming the area and her daughter, while the father went out for more firewood. It was getting dark when he came back, but he suddenly heard the mother scream, so he rushed over to discover that his daughter was standing on her feet and was doing a wild, erratic dance before she suddenly dropped dead. After all the funeral processions and grieving subsided, the parents wanted to see the video the mother recorded on that very night. They put the tape in the player and began to watch. At first it just showed the mother looking at the scenery and random animals that passed by in the distance. But as the time frame skipped, it jumped to when she was inside the tent with the daughter as she stood up and began to jerk around. But there was something wrong. It first was in the corner of their eyes, but as they replayed the scene, their horror became more and more real. The entire time the daughter was dancing, it was a ghastly white hand latched onto the top of her head. My grandfather came from Russia. He was born in Leningrad and lived there during World War II. When we were kids, he told us many stories about his own childhood. There was one story in particular that absolutely horrified me. He told it only once and refused to speak about it again, but he swore it was true. During World War II, in September 1941, the German army had surrounded the city of Leningrad and blocked off all the roads. Nobody could get in or out. They called it the Siege of Leningrad, and it was one of the longest and most destructive sieges in history. Hitler was determined to seize the city, and he didn't care how many buildings he had to destroy or how many innocent people he had to kill. In fact, his plan was to cut off all supplies and starve the entire population to death. After a year of this, over 100,000 people were dead, and the streets were littered with. At the time of the siege of Leningrad, my grandfather was only 6 years old. He lived in an apartment building near the center of the city with his mother and his 2 older sisters. At first, he said, it was not so difficult, but then the food began to run out. With each passing day, it became harder and harder to survive. There was barely anything to eat. Some days, he managed to get a crust of bread. The city was in chaos. People began eating animals and pets. They caught stray cats, stray dogs, rats, and so on, and ate them all. When there were no animals left, the cannibalism began. On the first floor of the building, where my grandfather was living, there were 4 apartments. All of them were inhabited. My grandfather and his family lived in the first apartment. The second was occupied by a woman and her 2 sons. The third was occupied by a man and his wife. 2 middle-aged sisters who had never married were living together in the fourth. One night, my grandfather was lying awake in bed, unable to sleep with the hunger. All of a sudden, he heard terrible screams and cries for help, which woke the whole family. It sounded like they were coming from one of the neighboring apartments. His mother's name was Zenaida, and she was a very brave woman. She decided to check what was going on despite the pleas of her frightened children. She gave them strict instructions to lock the door and not to open it for anyone. She left, and the children did as they were told. Standing in the corridor, his mother noticed that the door of the next apartment was slightly ajar. This one was occupied by a woman who had 2 young sons. Zenaida walked slowly to the door and cautiously peered inside. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. Scared to death, she ran back to her own apartment and begged her children to let her back in. When my grandfather and his sisters opened the door, their mother burst in and slammed it shut behind her. She was out of breath and her face was pale. She got them to help her barricade the door, and only then would she tell them what she had seen. On the floor, in a pool of blood, lay a severed hand. She said, there was a sickening stench of blood, and from the depths of the apartment, I could hear disgusting chomping sounds. When they heard that, the older sisters became very upset. My grandfather was so terrified, he ran to the bedroom and hid under the bed. The next day, when his mother went out into the corridor again to take a look around, she saw that the door of the next apartment was firmly closed. Everything was deathly silent. After several weeks, the situation in the city improved a bit. The Russian army managed to open up one narrow supply route, so some food was able to get through. None of my grandfather's family had died from starvation, but they were all very weak. During morning, his mother gathered together what little money they had and went to see if there was any food she could buy in the streets. When she came back, she noticed that the door of the third apartment was hanging on one hinge. This one was occupied by a man and his wife. Guessing what happened there, Zenaida pushed the door open and peeked inside. In the dim light, she could just make out 2 crumpled figures lying on the floor. Most of the meat had been stripped from their bones. Sick to her stomach, she returned to her own apartment. After telling her children the horrible news, she barricaded the door once again. However, it couldn't continue like this for long. Soon, their meager food supplies had run out. They had to get more, or they would certainly starve to death. Zenaida summoned the strength to get up and leave the apartment. No sooner had she taken a couple of steps down the corridor than she saw the door of the 4th apartment open. There were 2 middle-aged sisters living there, and one of them came out. The woman looked unusually good. All of the residents of the city were very thin and emaciated, but this woman looked healthy and even. The woman smiled and said, "Hello." Then She started walking towards Zenaida. Something about the woman's manner set her on edge, and she began to slowly back away. Looking over her shoulder, she caught sight of the second sister, who was creeping up behind her. The woman was clutching a huge axe in her hands. Zenaida let out a strangled scream. She was trapped in the corridor, and there was nowhere she could run. The two sisters closed in, licking their lips in anticipation of their next meal. Salvation came unexpectedly. As it turned out, my grandfather's older sister saw what was happening. At that very moment, a group of Russian soldiers were passing by on the street outside. The children opened the window and called out to them, screaming and begging them to come to the rescue. Without thinking twice, the soldiers ran into the entrance and quickly made their way up the stairs. When they came to the first floor, they saw the two fat women trying to drag a skinny woman into an apartment. The soldiers leveled their rifles and ordered the women to stop fighting. The fat woman with the axe took a swing at the soldiers, and they shot her right between the eyes, blowing her brains all over the wall. The soldiers ordered the other two women to lie down on the floor and began questioning them. Zenaida burst into tears and told them that the two sisters were cannibals, and they had already eaten the inhabitants of two apartments and were about to eat the tenants of a third. When the soldiers searched the other apartments and came across the half-eaten remains, they realized she was telling the truth. Thus, the soldiers rescued my great-grandmother and her family. They ordered the remaining sister to kneel down on the ground and executed her on the spot with a bullet to the back of the head. That was the punishment for cannibalism at the time. A year later, the Russian army managed to push the Germans back, and the siege of Leningrad ended. Over 1,500,000 people had died, and another 1,500,000 had been evacuated. Somehow, my grandfather and his family managed to survive the whole thing. After all, those two fat sisters had a lot of meat on their bones. Lydia had always been drawn to quiet, unassuming places. That's why the townhouse at the end of Willow Street felt perfect. It was tucked away, a little off the beaten path, surrounded by dense woods on one side and a row of nearly identical townhouses on the other. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but Lydia didn't mind. She was just happy to have found something within her budget and close enough to her new job. On her first night, a townhouse felt alive, though not in the comforting way a home should. Every creak of the floorboards and every draft slipping through the old windows felt like whispers in a language she couldn't understand. She brushed it off as nerves and exhaustion, but as she climbed into bed, a faint noise stopped her. It was the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and coming from the hallway, just outside her bedroom. Lydia froze, listening intently. The steps were slow, like someone was carefully testing each floorboard. She sat up, her heart pounding, and flipped on the bedside lamp, casting a dim glow that didn't quite reach the doorway. The footsteps stopped. She listened for a moment longer, her breath shallow, before convincing herself it was nothing more than the house settling. But just as she began to relax, the sound started again, closer this time, and unmistakably accompanied by the faint shuffle of fabric dragging along the floor. "Hello," Lydia called out, her voice trembling. There was no response, just the continued sound of footsteps, now coming from just outside her door. She braced herself and threw the door open, half expecting to find someone standing there. But the hallway was empty, save for the dim light spilling from her bedroom. Lydia stood there, staring into the darkness, feeling like something was watching her from the shadows just beyond her reach. The next day, Lydia tried to laugh it off. She told herself it was just the stress of moving in, the unfamiliarity of the new space playing tricks on her mind. She kept busy, unpacking boxes and arranging her belongings, but there was always a sense of being watched. She'd catch glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, like someone darting around corners, but every time she turned, there was nothing there. On the third night, the footsteps returned, louder and more insistent. Lydia lay in bed, clutching the sheets, as the sound moved back and forth down the hallway. She knew she wasn't imagining it anymore. The floorboards groaned under the weight of something real, something heavy. Deciding she had had enough, Lydia grabbed her phone and switched on the flashlight, determined to catch whatever. or whoever was causing the noise. She crept into the hallway, her footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. The light from her phone cut through the darkness, illuminating the framed photos she'd hung on the walls earlier that day. Then she saw it. At the far end of the hallway, just before the stairs, stood a figure. It was tall and cloaked in shadow, with a face obscured by darkness. Its outline was blurry, almost as if it wasn't fully solid, but Lydia could see the faint glimmer of eyes reflecting the light from her phone. "Who are you?" she stammered, but the figure remained motionless, staring back at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Slowly, it began to move towards her, dragging something behind it that scraped against the wooden floor, a soft, rhythmic sound that sent chills down her spine. Lydia stumbled backward, dropping her phone in panic. The light spun wildly, casting eerie, twisting shadows along the walls. When she looked up again, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty, silent. Lydia spent the rest of the night huddled in her bedroom, the door locked and barricaded with a chair. She tried to convince herself that she was dreaming, but the dragging sound lingered in her ears, echoing through the silence of the townhouse. The next morning, Lydia found scratches on the wooden floor where the figure had been, long, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. She moved out the following week, unable to bear another night in the townhouse. But even after she left, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her. Sometimes, late at night in her new apartment, she'd hear the faint sound of footsteps pacing just outside her door and the soft, relentless scrape of something being dragged behind. The townhouse remained vacant, a silent, unwelcoming structure at the end of Willow Street. The neighbors would occasionally glance at its darkened windows, convinced that sometimes, just sometimes, they saw a shadow moving behind the curtains, pacing back and forth, waiting for someone else to come inside. Jenny had always been afraid of the dark. She had lost her sight at a young age, and the world had always been a scary place for her. But she had learned to cope, and she'd always felt safe as long as she was with her husband. He was her rock, her guide, and she trusted him with all her heart. So when he went away on a business trip, leaving her alone in their house, Jenny was terrified. She had never been alone before, and the thought of it filled her with dread. But she knew that she had to be strong. She was a grown woman, and she couldn't let her fears get the best. So she went about her day, doing all the things she normally did. She cooked meals, cleaned the house, and listened to her audiobooks. And every night, when she went to bed, she cuddled up next to her husband's pillow, pretending that he was there with her. It was a strange and unsettling routine, but it gave Jenny comfort. She knew that she was safe, and that was all that mattered. But one night, as she lay in bed, something changed. Jenny felt a presence in the room, a sense of unease that she couldn't shake. She tried to ignore it, telling herself that it was just her imagination. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling grew stronger. Jenny couldn't take it anymore. She reached out and touched her husband's pillow, hoping to feel his familiar warmth. And instead of the soft cotton she expected, she felt something cold and clammy. She recoiled in horror, her heart racing, as she realized that she wasn't alone. There was something in the room with her, something evil and malevolent. She could feel its presence, its breath on her neck, and she knew that she had to get out. She scrambled out of bed and ran for the door, her hands outstretched as she tried to find her way. She could hear the thing behind her, its footsteps pounding the floor as it followed her. She stumbled and fell, her hands scraping the floor as she tried to crawl away. She could feel the thing closing in, its hot breath on her neck as it prepared to strike. Just when she thought it was all over, she heard a voice in the darkness. It was her husband, his voice full of concern as he called out to her. Jenny's heart soared with hope. She struggled to her feet and ran towards the sound of his voice, her hands outstretched as she tried to find him. But as she drew closer, she realized that something was wrong. The voice was different, deeper and more sinister. It was the monster, mimicking her husband's voice in order to lure her in. Jenny froze in terror, her mind racing, as she tried to think of a way out. She couldn't let the monster win, not after everything she had been through. She turned and ran, her feet pounding the floor as she fought to escape. She could hear the monster behind her, its footsteps growing louder and louder as it closed in. She didn't know how much longer she could keep running, but she knew that she had to try. She had to survive, no matter what. But it was too late. The monster was too fast, and before Jenny knew what was happening, it was on top of her. She screamed as it tore into her flesh, its razor-sharp claws slicing through her skin. She fought with all her might, but it was no use. The monster was too strong, and Jenny knew that. She closed her eyes, accepting her fate as the monster's claws dug into her flesh. Kat sat alone on her couch, shoveling popcorn into her mouth. She stared at her TV, tied to the suspense of the movie. The sky darkened as the sun approached the horizon. Hidden behind the ocean of trees, her house lay among. One lone tree stood in the center of her yard, visible through the living room window. A menacing presence filled the area, yet to make itself known. Kat was glued to her movie, but still able to catch a glimpse of the black object aimed at her door. Thud. Kat jumped, startled by unexpected disturbance, spilling the popcorn. What the hell? She whimpered, approaching the door. The doorknob was cold in her hand. Her heart pounded in her chest. The hinges squeaked as the door creaked open. A rush of cold air washed Kat's face as her eyes scanned the dim yard. Nothing could be seen. Nothing made a sound. She slowly shut the door, then cleaned up the popcorn. She had just sat down when another black object hit her door with a louder thud than before. She looked at the tree in the yard, almost certain she saw what threw it. Kat sat there watching the tree, waiting for something to happen. Just some kids. She thought nothing to worry about. She quickly made herself comfortable and began to turn on another movie. Minutes passed and another thud shattered the silence, shaking the door. Kat raced for the lock and quickly shut the blinds. They'll go away, she said, but grabbed a knife to calm her nerves and give her a sense of security. She heard light pecking on the living room window. The pecking grew louder, faster. She froze there in place, staring at the windows as the tapping became more profound. She was afraid to investigate, but brave enough to stand her ground. Her home was small, and every hiding place would be too predictable. Besides, she didn't want to hide. She wanted to see it coming, instead of cowering in fear. Tapping suddenly stopped. Kat slowly made her way to the door and put her back to it. A shadow eclipsed the light from the window atop the door. She stood just out of sight, holding her breath, with her back pressed against the wood. She could feel it knocking. 3 times softly, Kat could hear the galloping beat of her heart in her head. Her anxiety raised to the peak. 3 more knocks hit the door, harder this time. "Let me in." A hoarse whisper slipped through the door and into Kat's ears. She bit her lip, tears filling her eyes. Another 3 knocks erupted, furious now. "Let me in." A now angry voice ordered. The knocking didn't cease. It grew harder as the voice grew louder. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The knocking grew so fierce it could have shattered the door. Tears leaked from her eyes. What do I do? She thought, should I open the door? The knocking was more than she could bear. "I know you're in there, Kat," it said. Her stomach twisted, her breath caught in her throat, and tears now streamed down her face. "Go away," she shouted finally. "Let me in," it screamed in response. "Leave me alone," she cried. The voice and the knocking echoed in her head, making her more nauseous than before. Reaching for the lock hesitantly, she sucked up her tears and held her breath, unlocking the door and throwing it open. Nothing was there. A tree stood in the yard, unmoving. No wind, nothing. She shut the door, shaking in fear. With the click of the lock, the room grew cold. Goosebumps covered her skin. "Thank you for letting me in," a voice whispered behind her. "My life has been cool beans for a while, even when I was younger. But that all changed when my mom sent me to stay over my cousin's house for a summer. We were watching our favorite show in the living room, a popular show about kick-ass paranormal hunters and their journey through life and death. A part came on that scared me so bad I screamed. But that was nowhere near as scary as the look my cousins gave me." Mariah looked at Cassie, and then Cassie looked at the ceiling as if she was waiting for something. "Nothing happened." She sighed and said, "Don't wake Mom up." Then we watched the show. The next week, I was walking past the stairs and sneezed. pretty normal until Cassie ran out of her room and looked at the ceiling, like she did before, like she was waiting for something to happen. Again, she looked at me and said, "Don't wake Mom up." We sat in the living room the next night and channels surfed, waiting for our show to come on. When we flipped past a scary movie, I was about to scream, but Cassie jumped on me and held my mouth. When she let go, I yelled, "What the hell is wrong with you?" She turned pale and sickly looking. It made me shiver. I'd never seen Cassie afraid of anything other than a spider. She slowly looked at the ceiling. I heard footsteps heading down the stairs. Then Maria ran into her room saying Mommy's woke, and Cassie just held herself close. "What's going on?" I whispered. But I got the feeling I was too late. I heard my aunt's voice. She was groaning and mumbling. She got to the living room door, but never walked in. "Didn't I tell y'all not too loud down here? Y'all are being way too loud down here." Her voice was eerily watery and breathy. "Yeah, Mom, we'll be quiet," Cassie replied, still curled up. My aunt walked back upstairs, groaning and mumbling like before. We didn't watch the show. We just went to bed. I shot up out of my sleep in the middle of the night, holding my mouth from the screaming. Sweat was pouring down my face. The terror in my mind shook me so hard I couldn't move. My aunt has been dead for years. There was a young man who was very reckless and foolish. Sometimes, for fun, he would take his father's car without permission and go out driving around the area, even though he didn't have a driving license. One day, he was driving too fast, and as he came around a corner, the car ran up on the sidewalk and knocked down a woman and her young son. The mother was badly injured, but her little boy was killed on impact. Her son bled to death as she held him in her arms. The young man was arrested by the police and charged with reckless driving. He claimed he wasn't guilty, even though he knew the accident was his fault. His father even hired an expensive lawyer and tried to have the charges dropped. In court, the judge said that the man could avoid going to jail if he paid a lot of money to the mother as compensation for the loss of her son. The young man happily. However, the mother unexpectedly refused to accept any payment. "No amount of money is going to bring my son back again," she said. "There is something else I want you to do for me instead." The young man was eager to avoid going to jail, so he agreed to do anything she asked. "My request is very simple," said the mother. "Once a month, I want you to send a postcard to yourself. That is." The woman gave him a bundle of postcards. Each one had a stamp on it. She had even written his name and address on every postcard. "Please don't write anything on them," she said. "Just send them as they are." The young man happily agreed to her conditions. He was relieved that he could get away without being punished. There were 60 postcards in total. If he sent one to himself every month, it would take. Not long after that, the young man got a job and tried to put the accident behind him. However, he kept his promise, and once a month, he mailed one of the postcards to himself. At first, he didn't mind having to do it, but every time he sent a postcard, it reminded him of the accident. He began to regret that he hadn't just paid the woman compensation so he could forget all about it. Gradually, the young man came to hate having to mail himself a postcard every month. He hadn't seen or heard anything from the boy's mother since she gave him the bundle of postcards. He decided that she wouldn't know whether he was sending the postcards to himself or not, so he stopped. One day, a young man took the remaining postcards and decided to get rid of them by burning them in the fireplace. However, when he picked up the postcards and held a lighter to them, he noticed something strange. It was a hidden message on each of the postcards, written in invisible ink. "Hey, die murderer, you get a phone call from your mother. Since her car has been in the shop, she asks you to go to the grocery store and pick up a few odds and ends for her. Bread, milk, cereal, and chicken breasts." After writing down a small list, you reluctantly get in the car and pick up the items at the store. The lady cashier makes an odd remark to you. "You know, we're in no danger of a milk shortage." Upon arriving at her house, you knock several times. No answer. You decide to try the door. It opens. You place the grocery bag on the counter. Strange. There seems to be 6 other grocery bags, each with identical contents. In a couple, the chicken and the milk has gone bad. You call out, but no answer. You make your way through the kitchen and into the living room. Sitting on the couch, with her head cut off and neatly resting on her lap, is your mother. Naturally, you call the police, who come over to investigate. They mention that she has been dead for nearly a week. Furthermore, the police psychiatrist is at the scene and talks to you after you give your initial statement, sitting on the front steps. You overhear the psychiatrist talking with the crime scene investigator. It's not uncommon for people suffering from schizophrenia to get locked into a series of repetitive behaviors. He says, "You think to yourself, they can't be talking about me. Schizophrenia. Nah, repetitive behavior. Do they think I did this?" Suddenly, your cell phone goes off. "Hi, hon. It's me. Could you stop at the store and pick up some chicken and milk? Oh, and I need some bread and cereal, too." "No problem, Mom. I'll be right over." Hey, I'm Atlas. Subscribe and become part of our horror family. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Last of the Lost Hiker. In the heart of a sprawling national park, a chilling tale has emerged that continues to haunt the hiking community. It all began on a crisp autumn day when a seasoned hiker named Mark set out on a solo trek along a popular trail known for its stunning vistas and serene landscapes. Friends and family were accustomed to his adventurous spirit, but when Mark failed to return by nightfall, concern quickly turned to panic. Search parties were organized, coming through the dense woods in rugged terrain. Eyewitness accounts from fellow hikers who had crossed paths with Mark that day painted a picture of a man in high spirits, eager to explore the beauty around him. One hiker recalled seeing him just a few miles from the trailhead, taking photographs of the vibrant foliage. But as the hours turned into days, hope began to wane. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Mark was ever found. Local folklore soon began to swirl around the mysterious disappearance. Some claimed that the area was cursed, with whispers of a malevolent spirit that lured hikers into the depths of the forest, never to be seen again. Others spoke of strange lights flickering in the trees at night, believed to be the lost souls of those who had vanished before. These stories only added to the eerie atmosphere surrounding the park, transforming it into a place of both beauty and dread. The impact of Mark's disappearance rippled through the hiking community, sparking discussions about safety and the unpredictability of nature. Hikers began to share their own close calls and eerie experiences, creating a bond forged in the shared understanding of nature's mysteries. To this day, a legend of the lost hiker serves as a haunting reminder of the unknown that lurks in the wilderness, urging adventurers to tread carefully and respect the wild. Whispers in the woods. As night falls in remote camping areas, the tranquility of nature can quickly shift to an unsettling atmosphere filled with strange sounds. Campers have reported eerie whispers and disembodied voices echoing through the trees, leaving them both intrigued and terrified. These accounts often describe a chilling sensation, as if the very woods are alive, with secrets waiting to be uncovered. One camper recounted a night spent in a secluded spot where he and his friends were gathered around the campfire. As they shared stories, they began to hear soft whispers drifting through the air, almost like a conversation just out of reach. The whispers grew louder, and no one could discern the words. A group fell silent, exchanging nervous glances, and eventually decided to pack up and leave, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. Another account comes from a family camping in a national park, where they reported hearing what sounded like children laughing and calling out to them from the woods. When they ventured to investigate, they found nothing but the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The unsettling experience left them questioning whether they had truly heard voices or if their minds were playing tricks on them in the dark. Theories about the origins of these mysterious sounds abound. Some believe they could be the echoes of past campers, while others suggest that natural phenomena, such as wind patterns or animal calls, might create the illusion of voices. There are even those who speculate about the presence of spirits or entities that linger in the woods, seeking to communicate with the living. We invite you, our viewers, to share your own experiences with unexplained noises in the wilderness. Have you ever heard whispers in the woods or felt a presence nearby? Your stories could add to the growing tapestry of eerie encounters that make camping in nature both thrilling and mysterious. Ghostly encounters at campsites. Camping in national parks offers a unique opportunity to connect with nature, but for some, it also opens the door to ghostly encounters that linger long after the campfire has died down. Across various parks, campers have reported sightings of ghostly apparitions, each with a story steeped in history and mystery. These tales not only captivate the imagination, but also serve as a reminder of the past that continues to echo through the wilderness. One chilling account comes from a campsite near an old mining town, where campers have reported seeing the ghostly figure of a miner wandering through the trees. Dressed in period clothing, he appears lost and forlorn, as if searching for something he never found, and locals believe he met a tragic end in a mining accident, and his spirit now roams the area, forever tied to the land. Campers who have encountered this apparition often describe a profound sense of sadness, as if they are witnessing a piece of history that refuses to fade away. The psychological effects of camping in haunted locations can be significant. The thrill of the unknown can heighten senses, making even the slightest rustle in the bushes feel like a ghostly presence. Some campers report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread or anxiety, while others find themselves drawn to the stories, eager to uncover the truth behind the legends. This blend of fear and fascination can create an unforgettable experience, leaving a lasting impression on those who dare to camp in these haunted spots. As we explore these ghostly encounters, we invite you, our viewers, to consider the possibility of spirits in nature. Could the whispers of the past be woven into the very fabric of the wilderness? Have you ever experienced something inexplicable while camping? Share your stories with us, and let's delve deeper into the mysteries that lie just beyond the campfire's glow. Passing trail. Throughout the history of hiking, there have been documented cases of trails that have mysteriously changed or even vanished altogether. These trails, once well-trodden paths through the wilderness, have left hikers puzzled and intrigued as they search for routes that seem to have disappeared without a trace. One notable example is the infamous disappearing trail in a national park known for its rugged terrain. Hikers who have ventured there report that the trail appears to shift or become obscured by dense underbrush, making navigation nearly impossible. Some have even claimed that the trail seems to lead them in circles, as if the forest itself is playing tricks on them. Theories abound regarding the reasons behind these vanishing trails. Some suggest that natural phenomena such as erosion, landslides, or shifting landscapes could be responsible for altering the paths over time. Others delve into the realm of the supernatural, proposing that mysterious forces may be at play, guiding hikers away from certain areas or hiding trails from view. Local legends often speak of ancient spirits protecting the land, leading to speculation that these forces may be intentionally obscuring the trails to keep them hidden from modern explorers. As we delve into the enigma of these vanishing trails, we encourage you, our viewers, to reflect on your own experiences while hiking. Have you ever encountered a trail that seemed to disappear or change unexpectedly? Did you feel a sense of unease or wonder as you navigated through unfamiliar terrain? Your stories could shed light on the mysteries of the wilderness and contribute to the ongoing conversation about the strange occurrences that hikers face. Join us as we explore the intersection of nature and the unknown and consider what secrets the trails may hold. If you enjoyed these spine-tingling stories and want to hear more about the mysteries that nature has to offer, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll stay updated on our latest videos featuring scary stories, unexplained phenomena, and the eerie legends that surround us. Additionally, we encourage you to share this video with fellow adventurers and mystery enthusiasts. Let's spread the word about the fascinating and sometimes frightening tales that lie within our national parks. Don't forget to explore related content on our channel, where you can dive deeper into the world of the supernatural and the unexplained. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey, and we look forward to sharing more chilling stories with you soon.